In our fast-paced world, waiting can feel like an impossible task. We're used to instant answers, immediate results, and quick solutions. But the reality of our faith journey is often quite different. God doesn't operate on our schedules or our timetables. He isn't bound by the urgency we feel, and He doesn't rush His plans just because we're eager for answers. You see, God has a different perspective. His timing is perfect, and His wisdom is infinite. And while we may not understand it at the moment, God has a purpose behind every delay, every pause, every period of silence. There's a truth I want to anchor us in today. God will reveal everything in time. Not in our time, but in His. And when that moment comes, when God unveils the bigger picture, we'll see that His timing wasn't just good. It was absolutely perfect. Think about how many times we find ourselves wondering why things aren't happening according to our expectations. We set goals, we make plans, and we pray for clarity. And when the answer doesn't come as quickly as we hope, it's easy to feel frustrated, even a bit forgotten. But friends, God's silence is not the same as His absence. His delays are not denials. God isn't ignoring us. He's preparing something for us that is far greater than we could imagine. And sometimes He asks us to wait because He's working on things we can't see, aligning circumstances, preparing people, shaping outcomes, all in ways that will ultimately bless us beyond our understanding. His timing is not just about the destination. It's about the journey He's taking us on, the lessons He's teaching us, and the faith He's building in us along the way. We see this beautifully illustrated in the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. Here was a young man who had dreams, literal dreams, about the future God had planned for him. But instead of seeing those dreams come to fruition right away, Joseph found himself facing setback after setback after setback, betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and later falsely accused and thrown into prison. It must have felt to Joseph like his life was moving in the exact opposite direction of the dreams God had given him. But what Joseph couldn't see at the time was that God was working behind the scenes. Every twist, every delay, every hardship was part of a divine plan, a path that would ultimately lead Joseph to a position of authority where he would not only save his family, but preserve an entire nation from famine. God's timing was working perfectly, even when it seemed like everything was falling apart. And when the moment came, when Joseph stood before his brothers, he understood. He saw the purpose in the pain, the reason for the waiting. He realized that God had been working all things together for good in ways far beyond what he could have imagined. This is the kind of faith God calls us to. Faith that trusts in His timing, even when we don't understand it. We're called to walk by faith, not by sight. And that means believing that God is at work, even when we can't see it. It means trusting that He is in control, even when our lives feel chaotic. It means leaning on His promises, even when the waiting feels long. There's a powerful verse in Ecclesiastes 3:11 that says, He has made everything beautiful in its time. Not in our time, but in. And the beauty of God's timing is that when the right moment finally arrives, it all makes sense. The delays, the struggles, the times we felt like giving up. All of it fits into His perfect plan, and we see the beauty that only He could create. I know that some of you may be in a season of waiting right now. You've been praying for answers, seeking direction, longing for something that hasn't yet come. And it's natural to feel wary, to wonder if God is really listening, if He really cares. But let me encourage you, God hears every prayer. He sees every tear, and He knows the desires of your heart. Just because you haven't seen the answer yet doesn't mean it's not coming. Just because you don't understand doesn't mean God isn't working. He is asking you to trust Him, to hold on to His promises, and to believe that He will reveal everything in His perfect time. Until then, keep walking by faith. Keep seeking Him. Keep seeking Him. Keep surrendering and keep trusting that He is a God who never fails, a God who makes all things beautiful in His time. When we talk about God's timing, one of the most important things we can do is learn to trust Him in the waiting. And friends, I won't sugarcoat it. Waiting can be hard. It can be frustrating, and it can be frustrating, and it can test every fiber of our faith. But the Bible is filled with stories of men and women who had to wait, and through that waiting, they discovered something remarkable. That God is not only with us in the moments of triumph, but also deeply present in the process. Waiting on God is not wasted time. It's a sacred time. It's a time when God is working in us, teaching us to trust Him even when we can't see the outcome, even when we don't understand His plan. And as difficult as it is, waiting is a gift because it shapes us in ways that no other experience can. It transforms our faith from something surface level to something deep and unshakable. Think about Abraham and Sarah. God gave Abraham a promise that he would be the father of a great nation, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. It was a beautiful promise, one that filled him with hope and purpose. But that promise didn't come to pass right away. In fact, it was years and years before they saw even a glimpse of fulfillment. Abraham and Sarah grew older, and with each passing year, the promise seemed more impossible. They began to wonder, to question, and I imagine they might have felt abandoned at times. But God wasn't in a hurry, and He wasn't ignoring them. He was preparing them, teaching them that His promises don't depend on human strength or understanding. When Isaac was finally born, they saw the miracle of God's timing. He fulfilled His promise, not according to a timeline, but His. And in the process, He showed Abraham and Sarah that His word is unfailing. His plan is perfect, and His timing is always right. They learned that faith isn't about knowing when. It's about trusting the one who does. So often, we want immediate answers, immediate solutions, and immediate results. But God's perspective is so much bigger than ours. He sees the whole picture from beginning to end, and He knows exactly when we're ready for what He has planned. Sometimes He makes us wait because we're not prepared yet. Other times, it's because He's preparing the people and circumstances around us. And sometimes He simply wants us to grow in our dependence on Him, to learn to rest in His presence without having all the answers. God isn't interested in rushing us through life. He's interested in shaping us, in building a relationship with us that's based on trust and intimacy. In those seasons of waiting, He draws us close, inviting us to lay down our worries and to trust that He's holding everything in His hands. The truth is, God's timing is often a mystery to us. It doesn't follow our logic, our plans, or our schedules. But as we learn to surrender to His timing, we discover a peace that doesn't make sense to the world. We discover that we can rest, knowing that God is faithful, that He's working all things together for good, even when we can't see how. Romans 8:20. 8 reminds us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Notice it says, in all things, not just in the moments that make sense, not just in the victories, but in the waiting, in the silence, in the uncertainty. God is working for our good in ways we can't see, orchestrating details we don't even know about. Sometimes in the waiting, God is doing His greatest work within us. He's refining our character, deepening our faith, teaching us patience, and preparing us for the blessings that lie ahead. If He gave us everything we wanted, exactly when we wanted it, we would miss out on the growth, the resilience, and the wisdom that comes through the process. Waiting stretches us. It causes us to dig deeper, to press in closer to God, to rely on Him more fully. And when we come through the other side, we're not only ready to receive what He has for us, but we're ready to handle it with grace, with gratitude, and with a heart that's fully surrendered to Him. If you're in a season of waiting right now, I want you to know that God sees you. He knows the desires of your heart, and He knows the prayers you've whispered in the quiet moments. He hasn't forgotten you, and He hasn't abandoned you. He's asking you to trust Him, lean into His presence, and to find peace in knowing that His timing is perfect. Waiting isn't easy, but it is worth it. And one day, when you look back, you'll see the beauty of what God was doing in the waiting, the ways He was molding you, the ways He was preparing you for something greater. You'll see that His timing wasn't a delay. It was a gift, a path to a deeper relationship with Him, and a testimony of His faithfulness that you can carry with you for the rest of your life. So hold on. Keep the faith and trust that in His time, God will reveal everything, and it will be worth the wait. When we're waiting on God, especially during those difficult times, there's a truth we need to anchor ourselves in. Faith isn't about seeing the full picture. Faith is about trusting the one who holds that picture, even when all we see is a single, incomplete piece. In times of uncertainty, when God's timing feels hidden and His ways seem mysterious, it's then that our faith is most tested and ultimately most refined. The Bible reminds us that we live by faith, not by sight. It's a call to walk forward, even if all we see is one small step at a time. You see, faith doesn't mean that we always understand what God is doing. It means that we believe He is good and that He is working for our good. Even when our circumstances seem to say otherwise, faith is the willingness to let go of the need to know every detail and instead lean fully into His promises, trusting that He will reveal everything we need in His perfect time. Think about David, a man chosen by God to be king, anointed at a young age, but he didn't ascend to the throne immediately. Far from it. Instead, David spent years waiting, years hiding in caves, fleeing from King Saul, living in what felt like exile. I imagine there were nights when David looked up at the stars and wondered if God had forgotten the promise He made to him. Lord, he might have prayed, you said I'd be king. Why am I out here running for my life? David's waiting was long, filled with trials and hardships that would have been unimaginable to most of us. But in that waiting, God was shaping him. God was preparing David not just to be a king, but to be a king after His own heart. Those years of uncertainty were the very years that taught David to rely on God's strength, to seek God's guidance, and to trust in God's timing. By the time David finally took his place as king, he was not only ready to rule, he was ready to lead with humility, with courage, and with a heart that fully belonged to God. Sometimes God's timing doesn't just feel mysterious. It feels like it goes against every instinct, every desire, and every plan we've carefully put together. We're so used to having control, to making decisions, to moving things forward on our schedule. But God doesn't operate on our schedule, and He doesn't need our permission to work in ways that are beyond our understanding. That's part of what makes Him God. He sees the end from the beginning. and He knows exactly what we need, when we need it, and even how we need to receive it. He asks us to surrender not only our timelines, but also our trust. He wants us to let go of the urge to make it happen, and instead to let Him be the one who brings things to pass. It's about letting go of our plans so that we can fully embrace His. And when we do, we find a peace that can't be explained. A peace that can't be explained. A peace that comes from knowing we're not the ones steering the ship. He is. This kind of surrender, this kind of faith, is what allows us to walk through life's dark valleys without losing hope. It's what gives us the strength to keep going, even when we're faced with closed doors, unanswered questions, and a future that feels uncertain. Faith isn't blind optimism. It's rooted in the character of God. It's rooted in the knowledge that He is faithful, that He is good, and that He is with us, even in the waiting. The writer of Hebrews tells us that faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This confidence, this assurance, is what keeps us anchored in God's promises, even when life's storms threaten to pull us off course. It's what allows us to say, I don't know when God will reveal His plan, but I know that He will. And until then, I will trust Him. If you're in a place right now where it feels like God is silent, where it feels like you're walking through a season of darkness, let me remind you, God's silence is not His absence. His timing may be hidden, but His presence is constant. He is with you right in the middle of your uncertainty, walking beside you, holding you and guiding you, even if you can't yet see where He's leading. And sometimes the greatest growth in our faith comes not from the answers we receive, but from the trust we cultivate in the midst of unanswered questions. God doesn't always reveal everything to us because He knows that part of our journey is learning to depend on Him, to seek Him, and to draw close to Him. And often, it's in those moments when we feel most unsure that God's strength is most present, His grace is most sufficient, and His love is most evident. God's timing is a reminder that He is in control, not us. It's a call to let go of the demands we place on our own lives and instead to rest in His sovereignty. The waiting may not make sense right now. It may even feel painful. But I assure you, when the time comes when God opens that door, when He reveals His plan, it will all come together in ways that are beyond what you could have imagined. Every moment of waiting, every moment of waiting, every prayer, every sleepless night will make sense in the light of His perfect timing. He will reveal everything in time, and it will be beautiful. Until then, hold on to your faith. Walk by trust, not by sight. And remember, the God who promised is faithful. He will never leave you. He will never lead you. He will never forsake you, and He will never let you down. Another truth we need to grasp as we wait on God's timing is this: God's purpose is not only to answer our prayers, but to shape our hearts. You see, when we bring our desires, our needs, and our hopes before God, we're often focused on the outcome. We want the answer, the open door, the solution to our problems. But God, in His wisdom, is not just interested in the destination. He's invested in the destination. He's invested in the journey. He uses the waiting to transform us from the inside out. He's not only concerned with giving us what we ask for, but with making us more like Him. That transformation happens in the waiting. When we're stripped of our control, when our plans are on hold, when our dreams seem out of reach, that's when God does His deepest work in our hearts. He uses those seasons to purify our motives, to teach us humility, to refine our character, and to bring us to a place where our trust is not in the gifts, but in the giver. Think about the process of refining gold. Gold doesn't reach its purest form without going through intense heat. The impurities don't rise to the surface until the gold is placed in the fire. That's exactly what God does with us in the waiting. The waiting acts like a refining fire, revealing things in our hearts we might not even know were there. Our need for control, our impatience, our doubt, our pride. And through that process, God purifies us. He draws us closer to Him, teaching us to release our grip on our own plans, to let go of the things we thought we couldn't live without, and to find our true security in Him alone. The waiting becomes a place of surrender, a place where we learn to say, Lord, not my will, but yours be done. That's a profound transformation, and it's something that only happens when we allow God to work in us, even when we can't see the final outcome. Look at the story of Moses. For 40 years, Moses lived in the desert, far from the position of influence he once had in Egypt. From the outside, it looked like Moses' life had been derailed, that he had missed his chance to fulfill his calling. But God was using those years in the wilderness to shape him, to prepare him, to mold him into the leader who would one day stand before Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go." Those 40 years were not wasted. They were essential. They were the years in which God prepared Moses to be a humble, patient, and courageous leader. Moses learned to rely on God in the solitude of the wilderness so that he could rely on God in the trials of leadership. The wilderness was God's classroom, the place where Moses' character was forged and his heart aligned with God's purpose. And when the time came when God finally called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he was ready. Not because he had all the answers, but because he had learned to trust in the one who did. So often, we think the waiting is simply about holding on until the promise arrives. But friends, the waiting is about so much more. It's about letting God do a work in us that prepares us to receive the promise in a way that brings glory to Him. If God gave us everything we asked for the moment we asked for it, we might not be ready to handle it. We might take His gifts for granted. Or worse, we might start relying on the gifts instead of the giver. But when we allow God to shape us in the waiting, we come out on the other side with a heart that's deeply rooted in Him. We learn that He is enough, that His presence is more precious than any gift, and that His purpose is worth every moment of waiting. I know that for some of you, this process may feel painful. You might be wondering why God is taking so long, why He seems to be delaying His promises. But let me encourage you, God's delays are not His denials. His timing is not a rejection of your prayer. It's an invitation to trust Him more deeply. It's an opportunity to let Him refine your heart, to let Him shape your character, to let Him shape your character, to let Him prepare you for the blessings He has in store. Sometimes the greatest thing God can do for us is to hold off on answering our prayers until we're ready to receive them in the way He intended. God isn't interested in quick fixes or shallow faith. He's interested in a relationship, in a faith that's built on trust and surrender. A faith that can withstand the storms of life because it's rooted in Him. If you're in a season of waiting right now, don't resist the process. Don't try to rush through it or bypass the lessons God is teaching you. Instead, ask Him to reveal what He wants you to learn, to show you the areas of your heart that need refining. Ask Him to use this time to draw you closer to Him, to deepen your faith, and to transform you into the person He's called you to be. The waiting is not wasted. God is working, even if you can't see it. He's working in you, and when the time is right, He will fulfill His promises in ways that will take your breath away. Trust that the waiting is part of His plan, a vital part of His process, and that every moment of it is leading you closer to Him. One day, you will look back and see that God's timing was perfect, that His delays were blessings, and that the journey He took you on was as important as the destination. So hold on. Keep trusting. Let God do His work in you, because when the time comes, when He reveals His purpose and fulfills His promise, you'll be ready. Not only to receive the blessing, but to live it out in a way that glorifies Him. That's the beauty of God's timing. It's never just about the result. It's about who we become along the way. And in His perfect time, God will reveal everything, and it will be worth every moment of the wait. As we come to the end of our message today, I want to leave you with a truth that can carry you through any season of waiting, any period of uncertainty, any unanswered prayer. God will reveal everything in His perfect time. You may not understand what He's doing right now. You may not see the purpose in the delay or the beauty in the process, but trust me, God is at work. He is moving in ways that are beyond our understanding, orchestrating details we can't see, and preparing a blessing that is greater than anything we could have planned for ourselves. But His timing isn't just about the blessing at the end. It's about the journey He's taking us on, the transformation that's happening within us as we walk this path with Him day by day, step by step, trusting that He knows best. God's timing is never random, and it's never accidental. When He holds back an answer, it's not because He's forgotten you. When He asks you to wait, it's not because He's distant or disinterested. Quite the opposite. God's delays are deliberate. He waits because He loves you, because He's committed to doing what's best for you, not just in the short term, but in the big picture of your life. And so He waits until the perfect moment, the moment when you're ready to receive what He has for you, the moment when the blessing will not only bring joy, but will bring you closer to Him. Sometimes God waits until our hearts are fully surrendered, until we've learned to trust Him deeply, until we've let go of every plan and every desire that doesn't align with His purpose. And when that moment comes, when God opens the door, you'll see the beauty in the wait. You'll see that every moment was worth it. You'll see that His timing is not only perfect, but filled with love, and His purpose is greater than anything you could have ever imagined. So today, I want to encourage you to take action in your season of waiting. Don't just stand still. Engage with God. Bring your questions, your doubts, your frustrations to Him, and lay them down at His feet. Ask Him to help you see the purpose in the waiting, to show you the lessons He wants to teach you, to reveal the areas of your heart that need refining. And as you do, I encourage you to make a commitment to trust Him. Even when you don't understand, make a commitment to walk by faith, not by sight, to hold on to His promises. Even when you can't see the end of the road, tell God, Lord, I trust You with my future. I trust You with my future. I trust You with my timing. I trust You with every unanswered prayer, knowing that in Your time You will reveal everything. That kind of trust is powerful. It brings peace to our hearts, strength to our spirits, and an unwavering hope that nothing in this world can shake. This week, I challenge you to take a step of faith in the midst of your waiting. Maybe it's spending more time in prayer, seeking God not just for answers, but for a deeper relationship with Him. Maybe it's reaching out to someone who's also waiting and encouraging them to hold on, to stay faithful, to remember that God is with them. Or maybe it's simply surrendering your plans, your dreams, your timeline, and saying, Lord, I am Yours. Do what You will in Your way, in Your time. When we take these steps, we position ourselves to experience God's peace in the waiting, His strength in the uncertainty, and His love in the journey. And let me remind you that you don't have to wait alone. Share your journey with others. Let them know what God is doing in your life, even if it's not fully clear yet. There is power in community, in bearing one another's burdens, in praying for each other, and in walking this road together. When we support each other, when we remind each other of God's promises, we find strength we never knew we had. We find that God uses our stories, our waiting, to encourage others, to build them up, and to point them to His faithfulness. So let your story be a testimony. Let your waiting be a witness. And as you walk through this season, let others see the peace and hope that only come from trusting in God's perfect timing. Friends, God has a plan for each of us, and His plan is good. It may not look the way we thought, and it may not happen when we expect, but we can rest in the assurance that His timing is flawless. He has promised that He will work all things together for good, and He never breaks a promise. So hold on to that hope. Keep believing, keep trusting, keep waiting, knowing that one day, when the time is right, God will reveal everything. And on that day, you will look back and you will see that every prayer, every tear, every moment of waiting was worth it. You will see that God's plan was greater, His timing was perfect, and His love was with you every step of the way. So go forward in faith, filled with hope, anchored in the promise that God will reveal everything in His perfect time. And until that day, keep your eyes fixed on Him, the author and finisher of our faith, for He is faithful and He is good, always and forever.